Hello, and welcome to the SCAD Savannah Film Festival, the largest university-run film festival in the world. I'm Sean McKenna, a junior film and advertising major from Medford, New Jersey.
And I'm Carly Orrick, a fifth-year user experience design and film student from Asheville, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us for today's panel, Artisans, the Art of Fantasy.
There will be a brief Q&A session after the panel. At that time, please raise your hand, and we will come around to you with a microphone.
To start the panel off, we would like to introduce the moderator, Molly Hughes.
It's on, yeah. Hi, thank you all for coming. Wow, what a crowd. This is great. First, I just want to start by thanking SCAD for letting us come here and celebrate International Production Design Week. Woohoo, all right, little yeah. I'm just going to put my glasses on. Hold on. I'm just going to give you, can everyone hear me? Everyone? Okay. I'm just going to give you a little blurb about what IPDW is. International Production Design Week was organized by the Production Designers Collective, PDC, a group of over 1,100 colleagues worldwide who share a mutual passion and dedication to the craft of production design. This year, for the first time in entertainment history, production design is being celebrated for an entire dedicated week. Our event is one of over 200 events happening around the world this week, connecting both production designers and design students online and in person. We are excited to share this moment with all of you. If you would like more information about the Production Designers Collective and their global community, please visit their website, www.productiondesignerscollective.org. And I believe this and a number of panels that have been happening this week will be available on YouTube, probably starting next week. And there's some great ones around the world in multiple languages. It's just a great opportunity to see that there are a lot of people all over the world doing exactly what we're doing, but in different ways, and just connecting everyone is a really beautiful thing. So thank you for being here, for all of those people. I think now we're going to bring our guests out. So we're going to have them come out, and then I'll go through and introduce everyone. Yeah, please. So first, we have, to my right, we're going to go down in order, David Wasco, production designer. And Sandy Reynolds-Wasco, set decorator and art director. And you should know some of their credits as La La Land, Royal Tenenbaums, and Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2, in case any of you have ever heard of those. And next, Paul Austerberry. Oh, whoops, no, not next. Sue Chan, who designed Shang and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Landscape with Invisible Hand, and Shirley, and many others. And then Paul Austerberry. In case any of you are going at 1 o'clock, Paul designed the color purple. So some of those clips, I believe, are showing across the street in a few hours. And The Flash and Shape of Water. And Beth Mickle, last but not least, who designed a small film called Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Drive, and very excitingly, the upcoming Superman Legacy. Thank you all for being here, and we're going to just dive into it. So we called our panel The Art of Fantasy. Jenny Melendez, who is here somewhere, who's a member of the PDC, there she is, and I came up with this idea of how to gather production designers and talk about what we do in a slightly different way. So we decided to talk about fantasy. And I'm going to read you a little definition of fantasy. So fantasy, by definition, is the activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or improbable. This, coincidentally, is actually what production designers do every day. So designing a non-contemporary or non-historically realistic film has its own set of creative challenges. So we're looking forward to talking to these incredibly talented designers about their experiences. So I'm going to get going. I think I'd like to ask all of you this question just to get going. So we're going to start with how you build your team. When creating your design team, where do you begin? And do you have a different criteria when building an art department for a fantasy film? And we could just go down the row if you want. Want to start? I think that's on. It might be on.
Can you hear me? I think I pretty much approach every film, whether it's fantasy or reality, with trying to assemble the very best core team of crew. So I don't do anything special for fantasy. I just make a strong effort to get the best, almost overqualified people in every position. And I start with a very strong art director. Paul and I were actually just talking about my last movie, Molly's Game. I was able to get a very strong art director, and then below him, I got a great support staff, and that's essentially how I pull it off. So, you want to add to that?
Quickly addition, I'd say if you're in a film hub, that kind of thing is easy to do. There's a first, second, and third team you can draw from. If you're in a more rural situation or distant situation, then you're going to have the extra efforts involved with training people often. And just when you're preparing, just make sure you have a little more time for that.
Of course, I second everything that they say, and the decorator, of course, is one of the most important members of the team. And you know, each department head that you bring on brings on then their talented group of people whom they work with. If you're working on a sort of more fantasy-based project or science fiction, your concept team is often very important. Often you start out with your concept artists and yourself just at the get-go, and you're just sort of riffing on ideas that might be interesting ways to create the sets. And so there's usually, all over the world, there's wonderful concept artists. So depending on where you've worked, you may have worked with some that are good for some things. You know, they might be better for period things. They might be better for science fiction. And so you sort of draw together that team. And then once you start to go into production, you start looking at your supervising art directors and your graphic designers and your decorating team and so forth.
I'm sorry, to build upon what Sue said, after you get those initial designs going, you have to translate those into practical drawings or models to be actually built. And so in a fantasy, often there's more less traditional kinds of sets to being designed and built. So you need to employ set designers or draftspeople that can actually probably use certain 3D programs better than others. I mean, often you'd have you need something with NURBS like Rhino or something that has more curves, and for weird, wonderful kind of out there shapes, you need to pack your team with people who are actually able to realize those images that the concept artist and designer works on. So that's something to consider as well.
And I'll build on that. First, how many of you guys out here are interested in production design and art direction specifically? Just curious. Oh, look at all those hands. That means a lot to us. That's why we're here. And it's you know, a million different ways to do this job. But so we're glad to be able to talk with you all. And man, what an awesome panel. Feel really lucky being up here. I'll build off of that. And I think just like David and Sandy said, it's, you know, you build your core team. You're in the trenches together. So to me, and I say this so often, resilience and loyalty and good spirit, good heart, to me, honestly, is more important than if you're the most talented person for a job. I'll meet a couple different art directors, and if somebody has amazing credits and you know, has done it all, but maybe I don't click as well with, or you know, I've heard, you know, some references. Maybe they're not as supportive through the process, or they create, you know, more animosity in the department. And then I'll meet somebody else who's far less experienced, but comes really eager and really excited and really ready to give it all and to be in the trenches with you. I'll 100% go for that person. But then for fantasy, to distinguish fantasy production design, concept artist, concept artist, concept artist. And it's such a backbone of the fantasy side of things. I have to say I had no idea until I was lucky enough to get into the fantasy world about 5 or 6 years ago, and I just realized that is where it all generates from. We all, I'm sure everybody here, we've all done so much with research, and that's the first stepping stone that we all do. But then it takes, I think, really visionary directors and producers to understand how the research could be translated, especially when it's something like fantasy, like we said, or something that's really kind of out there. And so it's the concept artists that really help to show it and put it on paper. And then, like Sue said, some are better with more realistic stuff or period stuff, and some are better with fantasy stuff. And it's really kind of seeking those folks out and moving ahead.
Great, thank you, everyone. I saw all those hands. We're gonna ask for hands at the end and see if there are more of you by the time we finish. And also, we're gonna talk a little bit more specifically about skills. I'm sure you all have questions about that to ask everyone, so we'll talk a little more about that later on in our Q&A. So, moving on, when you're all designing a fantasy film, how do you ensure your creative vision remains in sync with the director and cinematographer, and frankly, the costume designer, special effects, visual effects, everyone, throughout the process? But probably let's start with primarily director.
I think our job is sort of to filter communication. The production design job is to filter the communication or the ideas of the director and make sure that it gets to everybody that's working on the production. And early on, when before things start to get very busy, you have more of the ear of the production of the director, so that you can communicate and talk with them. For instance, just say on La La Land, we actually had a director that was very interested in the design, so he actually asked for a desk in the art department. So he spent more time in the art department, so it was easy to communicate with him. But it's making sure that you're able to have these meetings, but when more and more people come on as you progress through prep, and you're working against this deadline of principal photography, you try to accomplish everything. You make sure that there are these weekly or daily or whenever you can get a meeting and communicate and talk with people and show. I often like to do a linear board. Sometimes it stretches the length of this room, where you actually put the concept sketches that we're all talking about, you put them in a linear analog order of how the movie is going to unfold. And sometimes I do that, and I move that around to like a production meeting, and you'll have that board. And when everybody is having a production meeting, they can sort of see what we're doing. And then you invite people to look at this and talk about it, and then you could figure out, okay, if there's an issue or a problem. So it's just a matter of making sure that everybody is knowing what we're not working in a vacuum out on our own. We're working with everybody else. So it's very important. Costume design, director of photography, all these people have to be. And on a slightly smaller movie, I don't have that much experience doing these massive $200, $300 million movies. I tend to try to find and work on modest or small scale movies where there's still a big crew, but it's not the thousands of people, and it's just easier for me to convey and to understand what everybody's doing. So,
just to follow up with that, there's a lot of communication digitally, but just as David said, it's good to have a physical place so that you can talk about it, and you can get the ideas are more easily exchanged, I think, and little reasons why you like an image or a director likes an image can be shared with people really easily. You can talk to the costume designer about why, what you heard from the director that they should know.
I agree completely with the super importance of the organization of the art department. The production designer is one of the first people on. They have the director's ear for like weeks and weeks before anybody else comes on. And one of the reasons that they've hired you is because you bring new ideas to the table as well. You see things in the script, in the story, in the narrative that enhance or are completely maybe outside but interesting to what the director wants to do. So the first couple weeks that you're working with the director, you're really all sort of throwing ideas back and forth and marinating on what could be visually an interesting corollary for the underlying ideas in the story, whether they're psychological, philosophical, or specific to the period. There's so many things that are going on in any story, and so teasing those things out and being on the same page with the director is so important, because then you have to communicate that to the rest of your crew, and everybody, throughout the whole process of prep, you're all coming up with different ways to tell the same story. And it's a way better story if the things that are not on the script are in the environment. They're living there so that the audience can absorb them without having to be told that that's what the story's about. So, that's a really big, important part of how you interact with the director. And then, in addition, of course, then when the DP comes on or the visual effects team, all those ideas then start to seep into what they do. And ideally, by the end, you're all on the same page. You've been making the same movie from beginning to end.
I'm not sure what else I can add, but essentially, I think we were chatting before this at breakfast about the different design teams' processes, and we don't get to share it like this. I mean, we get to share it now, but we don't get to go into other people's design offices very often. But there are certainly things that seem to be similar, and one of the main ones is, it's a visual language that we all have to, that we speak and we have to convey to everyone else who's just come on. And so, like David and Sandy said, that wall of images is incredibly important. And obviously, we also tend to give those same images to the DP, to the director, to put on their offices as well. So often you're in one or the other's office or in the boardroom. All these places, it's really good to have the visual references there, because everyone, when you ask a question, you can always refer. That's our business, is to refer to visuals. So it's just the greatest tool to have. And you can have them digital packs as well, but there's nothing like having them just out there on the wall, and you can see it all in once. You don't have to go through page by page. You can see the whole thing and see just even a color palette. You can just sort of glance at a wall and squint, and you can just sort of see where things are going through references and illustrations and whatnot.
Yep, so I'd say that all of that is 100% true, and that's one of the frustrations I think we've all felt with Zoom, is that, people, I think it's given the sense of we can all work from home and we can all work separately, and then just share ideas over Zoom. And I think that it works for some things, but I do think for the visual side of things, it is really limiting. One other thing I'll say that I just am working in the Marvel world, something that they do, which is brilliant, and I think every movie should be doing this, and I'm kind of amazed that they don't, is they do every other week, they do a creative department head meeting, and on the movies with the director I'm working with James Gunn, we even try to do them weekly if we can. And it's the cinematographer, the costume designer, production design, the art director will join, visual effects, and everybody and special effects, makeup if we're doing creatures, prosthetics, and each creative team presents their work to everybody together. The director is often seen, we will have shared some reference images or some loose sketches ahead of time, so he's not completely blindsided by what we're showing in the meetings. But we all kind of get these big packets together, and then we spend 2 hours together at least, and we go through them all once a week, and everybody gets to see together, oh, that's how that idea is developing. Oh, that's the kind of prosthetics we're going to do for that creature. Oh, this is the kind of lighting the DP, has been thinking about, and how that works with the set. And it keeps it so cohesive, and it's kind of blown my mind that most of the films I've done up until this point, there's always a production meeting where we sit, we talk about, schedule, but to actually sit and look at everybody's creative stuff together is amazing. And then, I'll reference a little bit of what the creature designer did there. Oh, I'll send you that image that I just showed because I think the colors that we're using there can influence what you're going to do in the costume. And anyway, it's one of the things I've taken away from those movies that I want to keep doing and proposing on any movie I do moving forward.
That's an amazing
Just
idea.
Quickly on that is great, and we've heard of some other, I think, grand productions doing that. But even within the art department, it's a really good thing to do.
I think laying out the film linearly also is a great idea, and you should take that with you as an idea too. Were you going to say something, Paul?
Well, I was just saying on the Flash we had because unfortunately we were prepping. I started prepping for a couple of weeks just before COVID hit, and then I had to go back to Canada, and it was based in London, and the director was in LA, and the costume designer was in London, and my supervising art director was in London, and so we did the very same thing. It was on Wednesday, and we had to work with the time zones, of course, and it was a creative Wednesday. I can't remember exactly what we called it, but it was every Wednesday we had the same thing, and we regrouped, showed what we were doing, solo, in a little vacuum. We were all in little mini vacuums, but we had, it's a collaborative. The filmmaking business is incredibly collaborative, so it was very important, those meetings, and it's great to have that. And we kept going, actually. When we were all in the same place, we still had them, but not virtually anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just second that whether a movie is big or small, the job's still the same. In the production design, every person in the art department is still doing the same job, whether you have more resources or less, and it never hurts to collaborate. It's a great thing to sit around and look at what everybody's doing. And one of the best parts of the job is walking around and seeing what each set designer, illustrator, what people are buying, what the prop master's doing. That's just fun. It's just great to just see how it's all coming together. And sharing information is the most important part of what we do.
I'll pipe up one small quick question. With COVID, everyone ended up having to get separate offices, and it's much better. Often most of the movies I've done, we've had a room, maybe not as big as this, but something like this, and everyone's in it, and sometimes I've not had my own office. I'm supposed to have an office so I can have the director by myself, but I like kind of often being out in the middle, because then everyone hears everything. Like if the director comes in, or the art director is talking to me about something, all the other people, if they don't have their headphones on, of course, sort of can perk up and listen a little bit. So everyone has a bit of shared knowledge, and then when I come to that person who's drawing something, they know a little bit more about what I've been thinking in general about other things that might be incorporated into the set that they're perhaps working on. So it's kind of nice to have. I prefer having the more open office type design, but because of COVID, we were all put in little cubicles, and I found that a bit detrimental to the shared group.
Yeah, David and Sandy, I watched the video about 7 psychopaths that you sent, and you mentioned that, David, about having an open art department so that if director comes in and you're having a conversation, everyone hears it, and everyone hears it differently, right? And you mentioned that. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I try to set up a bullpen scenario where there are no walls, where everybody is sort of working in a communal room. And when you get these occasional visits by the director, or maybe the director and the camera person will come in, or maybe camera, costume, they come in, and I have everybody stop and at least listen for that little window of time when the director is looking. Often I'll have a central table where you can put white models, because the other really helpful tool besides the concept illustration, and the concept illustration is vital, is white models, just made out of foam core, where you're doing models of something that you're going to build, or if it's even a practical location, you do a model and you look right down at it, and the camera person can look at it, costume, and you just can talk about it. And those tools are really helpful. But like Molly said, director walks out, and then I say, hey guys, what did the director say? And it's funny how everybody hears a different thing. Everybody said, the director said this, and no, the director said that. And it's interesting how you really have to have everybody listen, and then you interpret what was said. And sometimes the PA will say, oh, this is the idea that I have, and we're like, wow, that's the best idea to do this. So you just solicit. I really encourage everybody to participate and to be contributing, and it's very important that everybody reads the script and understand. Often a lot of people just go through this business like it's just a job and you're getting a paycheck and you're being told what to do. Whereas, if you're invested in the story and trying to figure out, because that's what we're essentially trying to do, is to help the director tell a story. And any ideas, the best ideas are great, and you just, they can come from anybody. So.
And just to add to that, sometimes directors don't know what they want to do, and they're very quiet, and they're sort of relying on you to sort of help them see it, because they might be writers and acting directors, and they're not very visual. And so it's really important to speak up. You know, there's really no bad ideas. You should just, whatever's on your mind, you should say it, because you have nothing to lose. You've been hired. You're the production designer, or the art director, or the decorator. Everybody in the department has a valid point of view. And most people want to be generous, or they want your input, and you should definitely give it. You know, this is your time to articulate what's on your mind. And maybe you don't do it with words, maybe you draw a picture, but that's really, really important.
And I'll just add to that. You keep an open mind, because, okay, if a decision is, let's do it this way, that may very well change. And as you progress through prep, and then even during shooting, ideas come up. Actors bring ideas, director gets ideas, and to be open-minded about changing things right up to the very last minute. And even after you shoot something and it's established, then it goes to editing, and you're changing things yet again. And then sometimes they'll have reshoots or additional photography to even change it more. So it's an organic art form that it's not rigid. It's not a concept illustration is done and that's what you do. And then we've worked with directors that sometimes do not want to use storyboards or concept illustrations because it locks them into a certain thing, which makes our job harder in communicating to everybody.
Thank you. We're going to start talking about locations a little bit. In the films, and this is for all of you, in the films you've designed, some worlds, and all of you, and big films, small films, some worlds are entirely fantasy, beautiful sets built on stage, and others are scouted locations. So what is the process like when you're scouting a location that may need to feel like an alternate reality or fantasy space? You want to start? You want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. I guess, well, to me, the location manager is yet again another very, very important person. It's not within the art department, but I often get to pick and hire the location person, so I try to get the very best person to be helping to look at locations. I tend to like to approach a movie with practical locations first, even if it's a fantasy thing, and then back out of that where you're then building what you may need to build in order to help all the other departments do what they're doing. So I try to find practical locations first. For instance, even on Inglourious Bastards, having worked with Tarantino in the earlier movies, and he likes to work in practical locations, we approached it where we found all of the locations practical, and then at about 10 or 9 weeks before shooting, Quentin changed his mind and said, I want to build everything. So we then had to completely change everything and start constructing things within a very compressed period of time. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Making my heart race a little bit, but
it's an amazing story.
I think definitely it varies by resources and by what you're trying to achieve and what the story expects of you. So, when you're doing a fantasy or heightened thing, you need to consider stunts, for one thing. Often when you have lots of stunts, you're more likely to build something because everything gets bashed up, or you have to have the versatility to have the whole stunt rig above and outside the frame. But also sometimes you need to extend a location. So like say it's like the perfect facade for a drive up, but you have to have a building that's 90 stories tall, and that's not there. Well, so you make it work. You figure out, okay, we're going to film everything that we can film with the actors at this level, and then our friends in visual effects will then extend the set. if the cinematographer decides they're going to pan the camera up. So there are all kinds of things outside of your control. So what you're really trying to do is to just find the location that's going to look best in the frame, for the story, and knowing what your resources are going to be to dress it, to paint it, to do whatever you need to do to make it the most wonderful looking place that you can. On a film that I did called Shirley, which was very, very small budget, we knew that we needed this home that had to feel very rich with history and also somewhat claustrophobic. And so we managed to find a location that we knew we had the resources to do some work for, but that was already full of wonderful wallpaper and great nooks. And it didn't have a kitchen that worked, so we knew we could afford to tear out the kitchen because there were some pivotal scenes, and that the circulation was just right for a handheld camera because there wasn't a lot of money for lighting. And there were things like that that we had to sort of figure out. But on a movie like Shang-Chi, where we pretty much built everything, except for the occasional thing where we needed a giant bus crash or something like that. Then we built that on a parking lot. So it varies based on show to show, but you just have to be very circumspect about what the needs are and the story.
I love location scouting. It's one of my favorite parts of what we do in filmmaking, because we get to see all these often very odd places that the regular public doesn't get to go, or you maybe get to travel to other countries and see amazing towns and cities that you've never been. So, but you want to capitalize on those locations, and there's some certain tricks I found for fantasy things. One of them is, well, I'm from Toronto, but there was a scene in a Resident Evil movie I did a long time ago when visual effects were kind of expensive. They still are. They're more probably now, but not used as much, and things like. I found a beautiful, super long facade at a exhibition grounds, which had an Art Deco building, and then this modern thing was a bit like you guys are studying art and architecture. There's like an Italian futurism. It was like this Antonio Centellaya thing with these repetitive towers, and it's okay. It doesn't look fantastic on its own, but I thought about this one particular scene, and if you just mirrored that whole same side, you had this amazing forced perspective, or not forced perspective. You had this amazing perspective from just a location that was there, and we just had to keep the actors on just, we shot them way left of frame, and they just mirrored it. A very simple, very, very simple effect. But this place became that it's just a convention center, but it looked so much better when it was flipped and mirrored and very, very strong. And then a completely opposite way for another kind of fantasy on, I was doing The Three Musketeers, same director, and actually it wasn't same director, producer, but we were in a small town, I can't remember which one, Bamberg or something in Bavaria, and I needed to do this, we're in a town that's landlocked, we weren't shooting anywhere near the coast yet, I needed to do a harbor, and we had this beautiful period square that was correct for the 17th century, but I didn't have any, we needed to have ships, we're going to digitally put in ships there, but there was a slope facade and a building that had a really high base, like a base before the first Piano Nobile went on, but it looked like the edge of a stone wharf. If you just pretended the building wasn't there, it became a nice clean line that all the actors, again, we didn't have a heap of money for the effects, so you want to keep the heads and things below a line that they can be against without a green screen. So I didn't have a giant green screen. I couldn't afford to put a huge green screen there, but I used a piece of architecture as a cutting line, and most of the action took place, all the extras running around were below that line, so it was kind of free, and there was a few actors in the foreground with their heads went above that, and they had to cut around them. But it was, you have to look very, the locations are very, very important, and you can, if you look and use some simple tricks, you can make them work to your benefit, even on a fantasy.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there on that. That's brilliant. That's a brilliant idea, the mirroring. And a lot of times I think it is the simpler solution. I think a lot of times people think they have to go in and totally, redo everything, rebuild over everything, plaster everything. And sometimes it really is just occluding something, just blocking something, or something that's just as simple as mirroring something, which those are the things, especially when you have some visual effects resources, that is a really quick and relatively simple thing. They don't have to, the visual effects department doesn't have to build the whole piece of architecture. They can just LiDAR scan it and flip it, and then it's right there. It's actually a really...
Lighting is a bit tricky.
Yes, I can imagine the lighting.
Shadows can be a bit tricky.
Everybody has to be on board with the lighting plan. But then that would be the other thing I would say. I've kind of been amazed with with lighting when you are going into a location, a lot of times it's something as simple as we don't need to go crazy with wallpaper and paint and all kinds of things. It could just be as simple as what kind of lighting can we suggest here that will help really bring the architecture to life, or what little ceiling detail pieces can you bring and have some interesting lighting come through it that'll just make this whole space come together. And so I think a lot of times, and especially in the beginning of my career, I always thought it was like paint, wallpaper, and dressing. That's what you do. But the resources are kind of endless when you start thinking about it. And when you start thinking lighting, you find interesting camera angles. Is there just some interesting little foreground piece of architecture you can create that they shoot through that makes an interesting frame? And then, like Sue had touched upon, VFX extensions are kind of a gift as well when you have the resources for it. And it's figuring out what at the lower level works, and then some fun concept, thoughts can come in of, okay, then what's above? What happens above a 15-foot mark that can really bring this into another world? How's the sky different from our sky? How's the sun different from our sun? That kind of thing. So yeah.
Sandy, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to segue for a second about lighting and locations. And I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about what your role, as time has evolved and everything is shot digitally, and when we're shooting on location, I don't know that people realize how essential your dialogue with the cinematographer becomes with lighting on locations.
Very important.
The lighting there's a fine line. Lights that are seen on camera in a scene is provided by the decorating department. Light that's coming from above that you don't see through balloons or whatever else, or lights maybe that are off stage filtering light through a window, are the camera's job, the grip and electrics. So in especially, I'm always impressed by more science fiction decorators who have to design these, through the production design department too, beautiful fixtures and things that will to attach, ceiling chandeliers, sconces, things that will light up a set. But yeah, if you're in a tunnel and you're seeing all the lights down that road, that's the decorating department. And if you're seeing a street with lots of street lights, that's the decorating department. And it's a big conversation because lighting has different colors. So and they will affect the mood. So if you're using mercury, it's got a kind of a greenish tinge, and the sodium is a yellowish tinge, and there's others that are much brighter. So that's a discussion you have to have with the DP beforehand, and early enough so that if you are buying fixtures, they can be altered. They can be brought to Grip Electric, and they can take the guts out and put in appropriate light bulbs.
I'll add to that and say that we were lucky to do the very first digitally shot movie, which was Collateral, and it was virtually all night, and we were really learning how to work with this transition from shooting film to shooting digital. And then it was complicated more because virtually the whole film was at night. So what fell on the decorating department's shoulders was to be lighting the whole movie. Of course, there was a lighting department, but Sandy was asked to, and I'm repeating, do, as far as the eye can see, street lights, change all of the storefront window lighting. All of that just sort of morphed into becoming an art department responsibility, whereas when movies were shot on film, it was a bit different. So I just thought I'd add that.
No, it's true. And if you are interested in set decorating, your budget is now enormous, right? Because you have to include all that, and it's a battle often. It's enough for the producers to understand.
You have to negotiate it earlier.
Yeah.
I think a lot of producers aren't used to, they don't know exactly what the set decorating department has to do. And we're basically, on a simple set with just 4 walls, we're putting everything on those walls and within those walls to describe the character and allow for the action that's scripted. So if you have a writer in the backwoods, I mean, you're going to layer that with all this ephemera paperwork, the desks, the lighting, the things on the walls, things that maybe from that character should be in there. But you're adding that live layer to help the story and help
so
the
that
actors.
the audience will subliminally understand more about the background of the character. Often you don't get to go into a character's apartment or house, which can tell this big backstory. And it's a lucky thing when that is woven into the script, when you can go into and decorating and props can add that. So it's things that the audience then can look at and just, now I get what this person is, or where they're coming from, or how crazy they are.
And the layering's not only if you're doing like an Edwardian house or a palace or something. It involves, as you see in a lot of the Marvel films, just acres of debris. So it's a twisted rebar, and
that's
and
brought by the decorating
It's not only
department.
concrete. You have to
rubble.
find concrete that's hazmat safe. So it's a workout.
Yeah, our scenic department is so busy. Because I'm sure all of you have watched movies and been like, wow, that looks really new. And like it everything in the world is old, and like everything in your own spaces has been there, has developed over years and years and years. And so when you do that on a film, it takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of aging, all that kind of thing that, I think people just sort of take for granted, but it really puts you into the fantasy of a film, whether it's a reality-based film or a fantasy-based film. It needs to feel like it's legitimately been there for as long as the story is saying it's been there for.
We're gonna break up the questions a little bit now. I'm gonna talk about visual effects for a minute, and then we're gonna talk about musicals. This question, let's say, like Paul and Sue, why don't you answer this question? Fantasy films tend to rely more heavily on visual effects than contemporary films. Could you speak a little bit about your relationship with the visual effects team and how that relationship evolves from pre-production through filming and the post-production process? And if one of you doesn't want to answer that and someone else feels passionately, go for it.
Okay. Well, it's incredibly, in a big VFX movie, that department it definitely has the biggest budget of any department by far. It's shocking when I hear the numbers, how big, it's like, can be 10 times what the art, the practical build of the set is. And I don't know, but you guys can pipe in doing these big Marvel movies. There's a DC movie, but other movies too. But I'm going to talk about the Flash, for instance. And we shot for 120 days, and 35 days were on location, and the rest of it was on studio build. So we built a lot of stuff. However, you're almost in all these movies, it's the last act tends to be almost entirely CGI, which is not my favorite because I don't have as much to do with it. You still have to be involved with coming up with what that is going to look like, even if it's done by a different group and a different department. But I don't know about you guys, but unfortunately our job ends when the film ends, and everything after that is, I provide a package of things and references of what those effects should look like, what the world should look like that they're creating, but I don't actually have the control. I'm afraid it's a bit of, for me, it's a bit of a sore point. We should have a little more input later on in my mind. I don't know what it's like when you guys have been doing yours.
Well, I think it varies from project to project, certainly. It depends on, Marvel is a big machine, as you know, and every movie has a slightly different team of visual effects supervisors, but they have within their operation a core group of visual development folks. And they're responsible for things like the costumes and some of the more hero creatures. But the art department really does drive a lot of what the final product could look like if we take the initiative to do it. And there are so many things that we have to actually get in front of the camera that we don't always have the luxury to do the things that are going to happen in post. But ideally, we make it so hard for them to change what we've done by building it, as perfectly as possible. At least on Shang-Chi, Chris Townsend really was super appreciative of us building as much as possible. Like the Fight Club scene was like almost all in camera. He was so happy that he didn't have to touch it with visual effects, because those folks, they have a lot to do. You know, they do not want more on their plates. So the more that we can do, the happier they are. Now, you know, Shang-Chi was more reality-based than, you know, Guardians of the Galaxy. So we were dealing with real places, and even our final magical village was, you know, an island of reality, and it was everything above and beyond that was fantasy. So, that was all embedded in our concept art. So we had a very, you know, the visual effects team was on as early as we were, before really, and we were back and forth a lot with our ideas about how something should look, how to, you know, some of the key pieces, like the dragon eyes where they go through the tunnel, and all of that was actually conceived of by the art department. But Chris and I would go back and forth, look at this video about how they dealt with water here, you know, blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't that be cool? And so we had a pretty good back and forth on that movie, but I'm not sure that always happens. We sort of got lucky. And then things like what the dragon would look like, we started that process and visual effects finished it. So I think that it can be a dovetailed hand-in-hand kind of thing. And again, when you get into stunts, a lot of stunts that you see are then picked up in visual effects. Like there's a lot of wire work, there's a lot of actual physical stunt work, but then some of it is, you know, death-defying, like people don't do that, you know, they fly and all of that kind of thing. And so that has to be, there's a certain point where that stops and it's picked up. But again, we start the process and often they finish it.
And if I may, I'll just jump in quickly on that. I think it's fascinating to be working now. We feel so lucky. Visual effects was not part of movie making really 20 years ago. It was not a standard thing. And even 10 years ago, most small and even medium-sized movies, there was no visual effects supervisor on it. There was no fixing it in post, or somebody would come in way after camera wrap to just do a little touch-up. But now it is starting to be a little bit more common that even the smallish, medium-sized movies will have a VFX coordinator on for the run of the show. And it's been really fascinating watching, I'm sure you guys have all seen it, like this dance/duel that's been taking place between visual effects departments and art departments. And everybody's kind of, in a way, at least in the beginning, I think people are trying to kind of stake out their territory and making sure they had the ownership. And then, and I think it's really just in the last, in this last decade that we've started to see how some relationships can work. It's actually interesting talking about this. Just at breakfast, I was saying this morning, a couple weeks ago, there was a chat through the Production Designers Collective talking about visual effects and production design, how they work together. And it was interesting to see the different viewpoints, and I think a lot of production designers kind of having a sense of maybe having not had the best experience with, visual effects departments in the past, or feeling like they changed everything in post, and I think it's going to be a really big thing moving forward for art departments and visual effects departments to really find great footing. Like Sue said, sometimes it goes more smoothly, sometimes it doesn't. But I really think trying to lay that groundwork where, in my mind, I really feel like the visual effects supervisor is becoming an extension of the production designer. It's always the set decorator and an art director, and that's kind of what I've always said up until the last few years. And now it's really also the visual effects supervisor. And I'm so lucky, I will say, Stefan Zaretti, the visual effects supervisor I worked with, and Chris Townsend, he's also so lovely. Steph really approaches it and listen, like, we have so much on our plate already in post to do. Every design you guys can possibly give us, please do. And I also think back to when I was sitting in your seat, 15, 20 years ago, listening to some production designers. I remember hearing a few of the very seasoned designers up there saying, we're not going to do that, it's, that's for them to do in post. It's only real scenery is what we do. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe that is the case, but it's really not. And it's a really fascinating thing to realize, like, we could literally touch and design every single thing that ends up in a movie, set-wise, scenery-wise. And so to try to do that. But what I also will say, Steph has been so great these last several years, where they have vendors just the way we have concept artists. Then they have these VFX houses, ILM, Frame Store, Weta, who take on a whole world or take on a creature, and they meet with them every week, just how we meet with our art departments. And I've asked Steph, hey, can I sit in for all of those meetings? And he's just been so welcoming. And now we have this thing where he sits in when I meet with my concept artists, and he sees ideas develop, we share. But then I sit in when he, talks to his vendors, and I have direct line of communication to the vendors, just to make sure in post it isn't going to be a surprise, because we've all done those movies where we sit and afterwards we look at what post did and we're like, oh no, that's not what that was supposed to look like, So then lastly, to what Paul said, I really do feel like it's important that production designers start to have in our contracts that we get to come back after a movie has been cut together, and we should have a non-consecutive week or a couple weeks to look at things, see how it shaped up. Cinematographers, lucky ducks, they get to come back and do a whole, color correction. Yeah, a couple of weeks they get to sit and really make sure their work is perfected. And we've kind of been left in the dust, and it really should be changed, where we should have that opportunity.
I mean, I do, just like you guys said, I provide, as best we can, we provide the 3D models of what we think it's going to look like. You do a massive car chase on a bridge with a thing launching off the bridge. Well, there is no bridge, there's no car. We have a big airport runway strip, we have cars, and we have the divider down the middle, and then we have a piece that we build, or some pieces we've built for the bridge for, the actors to stand there, but we still have to design the bridge. So we provide all of that. And I like to have a package for pretty much all the stuff that's going to happen in post, except that there are scenes like that, like on the end of The Flash, which were in a desert with military vehicles and jets flying around. I mean, we didn't have a heck of a lot for that. We shot for, I think, 15 days on a soundstage with a beautiful gradated sky and a sand-colored floor. I had props, sand. We had tons and tons of sand ready to go, but in the end, they said, nope, we don't need anything. Just give us green objects and the sandy floor. And I guess we had a beach in the back of the studio backlot afterwards. But you want to provide, or I think it's our job, unfortunately. Oh, and actually, you know what? I realized that I probably, of all the people you speak to, other than the director, the VFX supervisor on those movies is your friend and the one you speak to the most. And you're in their office all the time. How are we going to do that? They always want, like you said, you guys said, about like the more practical things they can have people against, or they can scan and make bigger, the better. I think I built the biggest bat cave ever on the Flash, and they were very appreciative. I mean, and it just went taller into the darkness, so it was quite relatively inexpensive for them to extend that one. But yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to have to move us on, if that's okay, because there are two questions I really want to get to before we get to the Q&A. At first, well, we'll start with you, David and Sandy, about, can you talk a little bit about designing a musical and what particular challenges there are for the production designer that may not be, that are related to actors, maybe, and directors, and what their needs are?
Well, you fold in having to communicate to the choreographer. It's again, our job to communicate what we're building and what we're doing for the director. And there's a choreographer that, for instance, the opening scene in La La Land, which when we read in the script, it said, okay, we're going to close down the Hollywood freeway and do a big dance number with 100 cars. And I was like, well, how do you do that? How are we going to do that? So we we finally figured out that we showed the director a couple of options, and we ended up picking this. It was a rather dangerous 100 foot in the air elevated freeway ramp that we ended up owning. But what we gave to the choreographer, and it's part of what we have to do in order to help figure it out, is a place to practice. So at our production office, which fortunately was under one roof, where our department, construction, and everybody, including dance rehearsals, we had a big parking lot where we were able to do an arc of cars, and they were able to, for a week, rehearse this, because we only commandeered the freeway for 2 weekends where we had 24-hour access, and we were working with natural light. So we couldn't get up there and try to figure out what we're doing. Everybody had to know exactly what they're doing. So it's again putting this an extra level of rehearsal, and then often a set if there is. But this actually goes into just dialogue. The set design and size is dictated by the words that an actor has to say from point A to point B and then walk out of a doorway. If there isn't enough room, so that's what we're doing. But we're doing it more so for a musical. I don't know if that.
Yeah,
You know.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the same things. So when you're looking at locations too, and the set, you said you have to design the sets large enough for the dance to happen. Sets, locations too, say the opening scene with Mia's apartment, we have to find an apartment with a long enough hall. I thought we'd never find that. I thought that would have to be built. But so the people can dance through different rooms and then come at the camera, along with the camera. I think in that specific space, we just built arches so that lights could be hidden, but
This
otherwise...
is for Mia's apartment in La La
Mia's
Land.
apartment at the opening. So in locations, it affects it because you have to have enough room for the scripted dance numbers. But musicals are a bit like the larger fantasies of Marvel's, in that they're innately fantastic. And your thread is to find out, a lot of them are put in the past, which gives them an immediate doorway to fantasy, because you're looking at, Gigi, which is like Belle Epoque, and you're looking at 1957 West Side Story, and that's just this glorious ballet of color and sets that kind of meld together. And in La La Land, it kind of reached between reality and fantasy, but the reality had to be lightly fantastic. So when these people break into song, it doesn't make you question that. So that was something to keep in mind when you're designing.
Yeah, we also had the great benefit of Justin Hurwitz had composed the music when he and the director were in Harvard together. So we had the music that was able to be played back in the sets. And that helped the actors and the dancers, and so it all helps.
Paul, do you want to add anything from?
Yes, I've only done one musical, and it was just The Color Purple, which comes out later this year, and the director is going to talk about it in an hour or two. But it was intriguing to be able to do, and I talked to a good friend of mine, Gord Sim, had done a bunch of Rob Marshall's films, and they were very rigid with their sets. They had to have all the exact same. The actual props had to be given well in advance and chosen well in advance for the dancers to rehearse with. So I was kind of terrified that we'd need this huge amount of prep that we didn't really have. But luckily, I guess Rob's from a choreographic background, whereas this movie was a little more fluid. And Fatima Robinson was the choreographer, and she wanted items that were similar. She didn't care that they were exact ones, and we always taped out the layout of the sets to accommodate, and we had many, many meetings, just like you mentioned, to make sure we could fit them. But in the end, and I was terrified about like the floor surfaces, because it was in a battered old juke joint, one of the sets, and I wanted all the warped boards and gaps and mismatched things and patches, and I was a bit terrified that some poor dancer's going to go twist an ankle and it'll be our department's fault. So. But I brought a lot of these things up early, and they didn't seem to worry about it. They were very, very, I was very surprised. They were very, very flexible with their choreography, which was against what I had imagined. And so I was quite pleased with that. And so sometimes, a lot of the sets were quite frontal. They wanted you wanted many layers of dancers and levels. I wanted to provide lots of levels for them to be on, so you could see the next dancers beyond. But it was very interesting, and there was a script where there was a scene where they were dancing in a river, like washerwomen in the river, and my location manager, John Latenzer, found this amazing. Well, I always say to the location people, by the way, is ignore what the script. Well, don't ignore what the script says, but get what the script says first. But if there's anything that you think is incredibly interesting that you've seen in your travels for other movies, or if you've just passed by it in this one, please bring it up. And and show me, because maybe we can incorporate it and I can show the director and work it into the story, because, you know, just because it's written on the page doesn't 100% mean that it has to be exactly that. If the scene is told better visually in another location that you can provide, please do it. Anyway, long story is, there was this beautiful waterfall and a small river, but I wanted them to dance this whole scenario right with the water falling behind them like a falling curtain. But of course, it was incredibly simple idea, very, very complicated to execute, because the waterfall, it was a built dam, kind of old one. But, you know, it was 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet, rocky, and we had to have underwater divers and grips build this platform, and we only had 3 inches of water on top, and then of course it looked like plywood underneath, so it had to be all painted to look like the stone. But it became quite a beautiful visual thing on a really simple set. It was quite complicated to execute, and difficult for the dancers to work in. But I think it was successful. I think you have to just be quite open with what you're trying to present.
I mean, it sounds like too. One of our biggest jobs is presenting ideas with conviction, right? You know that. If you're not confident presenting an idea like that, then not everyone's going to go for it. But obviously, you sold everyone.
Yeah, and
right?
bring the director in the way you go around through the woods in the backwoods way, so you can. The first time the director sees that location that you're proposing is the way you want it to be seen. It's just first impressions are very, very strong, and if they come in the back way and it doesn't look like anything to start with until you get them to this point, try to just like blindfold them and then just let them see it right there. You know.
Great. We're going to start a Q&A here in a few minutes, but I have one last question. Based on my experience, I wanted to ask everyone else, and that is, have you ever interviewed for and not gotten a job that you really wanted, and what did you learn from it? I'm guessing all of us have, so whoever wants to start, whoever not traumatized by the experience and wants to start, go for it.
Well, you know, the interview process, I'll make it quick, is part of designing a movie is you're going to get these jobs and work on them. And then there's a window of time when you're having to find and get the next job. So you're interviewing on stuff. And I love that process. And sometimes because we hold out and are very careful about what we are pursuing, there's sometimes a window of months that goes by that we're just interviewing. So I try to get every job that we decide, hey, this is what we want to do. I really try to go in there and get the job. And what we were talking about actually earlier was how the interview process has become now where you all have to, when you go and interview, it wasn't the same 10 years ago, 20 years ago. You basically have to bring and design the entire movie and bring it on your interview and hand that over and show, and then hope that you get the job. And sometimes you don't get the job, and they can take the ideas, but there have been a few things that, but I know that I have to have my heart has to be in what I'm pursuing in order to actually end up getting the job. I have to have the power in doing a good interview, and if my heart isn't into it, I know I'm not going to get the job. But I don't go on those interviews. I will say that one project that early on in my career that I would have liked to have worked on, and I didn't get the job, was Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders, which was a S.E. Hinton project. And I actually, the reason that I went after that, and I won't make it a long story, is that early on in my career, I had the opportunity to be a PA on Apocalypse Now, and I turned it down. And I always resented that, and I wanted to go back into and break into the film business, and the first opportunity was when he was starting right after One from the Heart, which is a great musical that we referenced for La La Land, but I wanted to work on The Outsiders. So that's the movie and I didn't get the job.
So sorry.
Oh wow. It's a great movie.
Who wants to go next?
I think that definitely there have been jobs that I didn't get that I was very, very disappointed on. And I think when I was young, like all of you, I wanted every job. Like if I didn't get it, I was just, oh, I suck, I'm no good, maybe, I screwed up. But now I feel like now that I'm in the middle of my career, I realize, as David said, that if it's not right for me, then I should not be going after it. That doesn't mean that I haven't recently interviewed for jobs that I didn't get. And I think the most important thing is that you make a fan. Sometimes when you don't get a project, it's completely out of your control. It wasn't that you didn't do a great presentation, that you didn't have great ideas, but there was some other mitigating circumstances, especially when projects, there are producers. There are, so many people involved. There are people who have relationship with the studio, whatever, and that's on a big movie. On a little movie, sometimes you just don't click. So I now am much more at peace with the fact when I don't get a job, and the recent one that was super, super disappointing, I got a very nice email from the director, which has never happened to me. So I feel like, okay, well, maybe I'll get that job down the line. I was teased into thinking that maybe I still have a chance of working with this director. So, but the important thing is that you take all of your defeats as learning experiences and then get to the point where you start to really solidify who you are and what you want to do and what you're good at, and really put your all into that package and keep developing that package, because ideally, if you get to do this for a long time, you're going to do different things all the time. You're going to keep changing, and you're going to keep developing and learning from your peers. So and hopefully you get to a point where you don't get disappointed when you're rejected.
I always think I do bad interviews, so there's been plenty of movies I haven't gotten. I think, oh, it's because I did a bad interview. But to what David was saying about these days, when you have to provide so much, your whole idea about what the movie's going to look like, it's not really fair, because often you've got the script 2 days prior to your interview, and how are you, well, actually it's best if it's really close like that, because then you have a really good excuse of not being able to have enough stuff. If you've been given the script quite a while in advance, then it's tougher. And the crazy thing is, you have, like you said, you have to be convicted. You have to have conviction, and you have to put forward your point of view if it's this kind of thing. If they're not just interviewing you to see how you are as a person and how you interact, like, so, just talk about things. But if you're putting forth your idea, it may be completely different than what the director has in mind. And so it can, but if your job is to be convicted about your opinion. So you lay it on the line, and you may be wrong, and that you're out of the job. I mean, it's just like, well, that's not at all what I was thinking. I mean, there was a really big franchise movie I had an interview with a year ago, and I referenced, there's many movies before it, and I referenced one of the ones that had, to me, was like the most, different from the rest of them. But that was not what the director was going with, the regular version of that whole series of movies, and I didn't get the job, and it's just as well, because I don't think I could do it I didn't like, I preferred the route that I was, the one version of this particular big group of movies was that I liked, and I didn't really like the other one. So in a way, it was probably helpful, but I mean, yeah, plenty of jobs. You go for interviews, and there's so many you don't get, and you have to take them with just don't take them to heart, because that's just part of the process.
And it is really true. I do feel like there are so many of us out there. There are so many different kinds of movies, and and different ones are better fits for different people. It's just, and kind of being aware of that. One experience that sticks out with me, I had worked for many years with this wonderful director duo, Ryan Fleck and Anna Bowden. We did all these very tiny indies together 20 years ago, and really built our careers together. And then they had gone from doing, I think we did like a $10 million movie together, and then 5-6 years later, they were getting catapulted into the Marvel stratosphere to do Captain Marvel. And they were very kind. They really tried to bring their cinematographer, Andre Perrick, who's brilliant, costume designer, their AD. They tried to bring me. And I remember I was lucky enough to interview. This was, 7 or 8 years ago. And I had done some smaller mid-range studio movies at that point, but certainly nothing with any giant visual effects like these Marvel movies ask for. But I went into the room and I thought, well, I've decent chance, and I had this long history with these guys, and now directors had called me ahead of time and said, like, none of the other production designers are really clicking, so we actually feel like this, you could have a decent shot here, so come in with your head up. And I went in and I was just promptly shot down. I mean, almost in like glorious fashion. Like before I even left the room, they were basically like, nah, it's not gonna work. And I was like, oh man. And I remember afterwards, a lot of the things I was hearing, from agencies, from the companies, from friends who had designed these giant movies and producers who did these giant movies was, well, how could you ever expect to get that movie? You didn't have that level of experience. I had this whole existential year of like, well, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? If you don't have the experience, how do you get the job? And if you can't get the job, how do you get the experience? And so I had the stretch of time being very down and kicking myself and thinking, well, once you're an indie kid, you're always an indie kid. And then out of nowhere, the phone rang, and it was James Gunn for Guardians of the Galaxy. And for a minute, I definitely thought, like, they're just trotting me out to make me feel good because they just, killed my dreams a year ago.
They don't do that. They don't do that.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, they're just ticking a box. But then, and I still remember I said to James, he was like, it's a shame that the way things had gone. I know what had happened with Captain Marvel, but like let's I'd like to give this a shot. And I just thought like, oh my gosh, like why this is an amazing experience. And he had interviewed, I knew, just amazing production designers who I just really admired. And I remember it was really clear he wanted to work with somebody who was just an out of the box idea. He was just wanted to work with somebody who wasn't the same old person who'd done all the other Marvel movies before, and just wanted fresh ideas. Anyway, it was just a good learning lesson of like, yeah, so you might be right for some projects, but not for others. And a lot of times it is having a director who just wants to work with somebody fresh and have a different take on things. And then he also said, he's like, listen, I just wanted somebody fresh, but also we had a good time chatting for an hour, and we're going to be working together for a year and a half. So I'd rather make sure it's somebody that I'm going to get along with. And anyway, so I'll just say, just don't get your hopes and heart down.
No, I'm going to answer this question, before and then we're going to ask questions or take your questions. I worked on Harry Potter for a very long time, and when I finished in 2010, I was an art director. I wasn't the designer, and I wasn't the supervising art director. I was one of four or five art directors. There were fewer art directors back then. And I moved back to the United States, and David Yates, our director from those films, had decided after he finished Harry Potter that he wanted to do an indie film in America. And so I was like, well, I know David. I should get to design that film. And so I hounded my agent and hounded my Stuart Craig, who I had worked for many years, a production designer on those films, and asked him to ask David if I could interview and all this stuff. And so I thought, this was a while ago. 13 years ago. And I thought, I'm going to get this job. And so I went to meet him, and I was at that point, I don't know if I'd designed anything. I might have designed one $2 million film or something. And I went to meet him in New York. He came, and he was in staying in a hotel in New York. We met in a cafe or something. And I presented some ideas. And I presented them, in hindsight, I presented them badly. and I realize that now, but he was, as he always is, the most gracious and polite. We had a lovely conversation, and then I found out later that the job went to an amazing production designer who's passed away named Therese Dupre, and it was her movie. Like, it wasn't my movie; it was her movie. She was the designer that was supposed to design that movie, and then unfortunately the film didn't end up happening, but one of the things you realize, and now 13 years later, last summer, I got a call out of the blue from David to design his next movie. So I did that with him, and it was the right time. And we actually have never spoken about the bad interview. Maybe someday we will. But you realize in hindsight, I wasn't ready for that film. She, I'm sure had better ideas, or ideas that were more suited to him at that time. But at the time, that was really hard because you're hungry and you're starting out and you want every film, and you don't know quite yet what you're suited to or what your gut tells you is the right project. And I think it takes a lot of time for us. It's like what David was just saying, like you know in your gut if you're right for a film or not, and you might interview for it. I know some of us have probably interviewed for things during this strike period just to have a job that we weren't right for and maybe got them or didn't get them. but you know, you learned in your gut what's right for you. And one of the things about the Production Designers Collective is learning to celebrate your peers and the work that they do. And I think that part of that is accepting when someone else gets a job that you want. You know, so now we get to look at each other's films, and we're all excited to go see a little bit of Color Purple. And tomorrow we're very excited to watch La La Land. But that's a better approach. So if you can get there where you all sort of share each other's ideas, support each other's work, and cheer each other on, that's a better place to be and a better way to move forward in your career, and you will be happier for it. So on that note, you know, I didn't get to the skills question, so I'm hoping one of you could ask a question about what skills you need to be in the art department, but we'll see. I think someone's going to be bringing microphones around.
Yeah, just a reminder to raise your hand, and one of us will come around to you with a microphone. And I'm just going to go ahead and start off the first one really quickly. I personally am a special effects artist, and so I would really love to hear, especially in the context of fantasy, if anyone has had like a really magical moment on set when you finally see the art direction and the production design and the wardrobe and the special effects and all that stuff coming together, and if anyone has like a specific moment that really stuck out in their mind.
That's a tough one because so much of what you guys do is at the end of after we're done.
Was it special effects or visual effects?
Special effects practice.
Special effects.
So
Oh, sorry.
animatronics and things. Let's see. I guess I'll jump in. I'll jump in quickly. This is just a small one, but amazing one on Guardians. We had done this crazy 1980s kind of weird cul-de-sac world, a suburban world where it's all inhabited by humans and animals. And so we had done, or I'm sorry, by animals who are humans. And so they all, you know, rabbits walked on two legs and had arms and everything. And so anyway, we designed this whole cul-de-sac, this whole suburb. That was our effort. And special effects we designed all these humanimals with them, so all these kind of crazy animal creatures. They all came out, and it was all special effects. If you guys saw that, it was 50 of them, and they were all done, hair, ears, the whole thing. And then all of our period cars, and it was just a moment where everything had come together. But in the scripted moment, the first time that the spaceship is landing, there's a warthog with a little baby stroller, and inside the stroller is a little animatronic baby warthog, and it was the cutest little thing. We had concepted it, we'd done all these little studies, and sure enough, on the day, there's Legacy Effects with their little cables, and they had it all ready to go, and it was an amazing moment, a real animatronic little baby warthog in a stroller on a street with a bunch of humanimals.
Who's next? Oh, there you go.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm a 2D animation major with the minor in themed entertainment. And I was wondering, what would you recommend students to do if they are interested in pursuing a career involving fantasy worlds?
Specifically fantasy worlds or production design? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suppose starting out, if you are very good at drawing and artwork, a great entry-level job would be concept art, illustration. The most fundamental part of concept art is really just taking a photo of a location and saying, this is what we're going to make it look like. So, if you can get a job in an art department where you say, the production designer gives you a photo and says, we're going to turn this into a supermarket. And, the graphic design team will come and do the signage, and they'll say, well, this is what the signage is going to look like. And you can kind of doodle it in there and show what it's going to look like. That's a really good way to, sort of encompass a lot of the things that are going on in the art department.
All right, we have another question over here.
Hi, my name's Matilda. I'm a production design major, and I'm very interested in sustainability on film sets, so I was wondering if there were any steps that you had seen, like someone else do, or that you yourself had taken to make a set more eco-friendly.
This is a hot topic.
Well, the one thing I think we do partially for money is recycle sets. Plenty of times we have a set earlier in the film that if you can revamp the pieces of it, rework it, retool it, reshape it. You're not throwing it away and building from scratch. If you can reuse things, it works good. It's really good for the money. It's also good, obviously, for recycling.
Also, if you're in a town which is busy, as your project like slows down, other projects are gearing up, and you can give them a lot of your work tables, your sets, your flats. Sadly, that's kind of the closest we get to. There's a lot of waste.
I mean, there's backlots that get reused a lot, and revamped. There's obviously the proper Hollywood ones that are there all the time, but in England at Leavesden, I ended up taking over a big chunk of the Batman's big lot, which was a massive one, and they tore down half of it, and then I revamped and reused the other one. So I mean, it still was a big endeavor and still a lot of waste, but we did get to recycle a lot of stuff.
I have a question right over here.
Hi, my name is Dana. Thank you so much for being here. My question is for Sandy and David. In La La Land, the epilogue scene, we have this amazing world that's like more theatrical and tangible. Can you tell us about the process of creating that whole scene that I found fantastically?
Creating the epilogue scene and what that was like?
Yeah, when you have like all the props.
Yeah, it was again one of those stumpers when you read the script and you were like, get to this end part where essentially it's our job to help figure these complicated things out. And we of course referenced a lot of different movies. There is one interesting movie that called Sunrise, that is a 1927 romantic story that was done by a German director that had this incredible fantasy scene in the end. And we brought that to Damien and showed him, and he was like, holy mackerel, this is amazing. Let's do it like this. So we again, getting back to Molly's question about choreography and everything, it was a complicated thing that became a big choreographed dance number and all, but it started just going through from one set into a soundstage, and we had to do models, and we referenced some of my favorite movies. One from the Heart, again a Coppola movie. All of the Hollywood musicals from the past. We looked at everything, and of course we had the music was already composed and at our available to us, so that helped drive it. But it's funny how it did transcend and become into magic. And I don't know if there is a formula where you can say, okay, you do this, this, and this, and it becomes magic. It's such an odd gamble when something strikes a note with everybody. But that epilogue, we call it the epilogue scene. That director did. Contrary to what we're talking about with visual effects, he really wanted us to go low-tech analog and didn't want any visual effects. That's why we did everything was like cut out of cardboard and made painted, hand-painted backdrop murals where you could see the strings of things hanging. We left all that in. That was all left in there. So, and we've worked with a few directors that are like that forbid they wanted in-camera stuff. Everything was in camera. All the early Wes Anderson movies were like things hanging on strings and very analog. But that's still kind of visual effects. Even if you're taking out the string, it's subtle visual effects. But I don't know if that answers that question. But that was quite a wonderful magical scene, and it's also due to the director who had this movie written many years ago and was thinking about it for so much. So often so many directors come on and there's very little time for them to figure things out. He had this in his mind, and he really was on this for many years. And, we get the funding and do it, and it comes off and strikes a note with the public.
All right, we have our last question right here.
Hello. So, as you've mentioned a couple times, it's hard to, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? How do you really get yourself out there? Because I know graduating, I'm not going to be designing a movie right off the bat. How do you really get your foot and your name out there? What are some steps that you can take to do that?
Well, I think the key is just to get on something. And I mean, I started driving a truck for the set tech department. I volunteered. I got it when you're some places you're not allowed to intern. But I was able to get in I worked for free for 4 days in the art department just to see, because I was really curious. I didn't have the benefit of a great education specifically. I came from architecture, good education, just different. And so I didn't know anything about the world, but I'd bumped into people and I was fascinated by movies and things. And I volunteered, got in, and then on the 4th day, the art director knew who I was broke. Said, well, there's a paid job for $100 a day driving the cube truck and set deck if you want it. I'm like, absolutely. So I took it. And then you just get to see, you get to see things happening, and you just learn from, other people doing things, and you're just around it. And I think that's probably the most realistic way of getting in, is just straight in anywhere to start with, and then you make connections, and you can work your way into the right thing, or you do student films to do what you really want to do to help hone your skills.
And
you got to get in. You got
this?
to actually start doing stuff.
Yeah, could you talk about skills just a little bit before we go? I think probably people are eager to know what they should walk away from school, what skills they should walk away from their education with to get in.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. Just a couple things. When I first started 20 years ago, my mentor said, learn 3D modeling. And I feel terrible that I didn't take him up on that, and I did not do that, and I really wish I had, because now it just moves so fast. There's a new program every year, and it's really... I do feel like, again, even on smaller films, I feel like people are all going to be using Unreal, and and people are using Rhino, and just to be able to visualize things, and it's such a tool. So if you have the opportunity, I'd say really try that. Second, I would say just working in a team. I think a lot of people enter the art department and not realize quite what a giant team effort it is, and I think some folks think it's artistic, so they just sit at a desk. Even if you're set designing, and you are sitting drafting, you're sitting in with a big group, and it is a big team effort. So that is really important. Lastly, I would say kindness. Like it goes so far. If you're a really talented PA, but you come in with a kind of negative attitude, or you grumble, or you roll your eyes, you're not going to get a call again. It's just there are so many people who want to be doing this. So positivity, kindness, it goes so much farther than I think folks realize.
Yes, 100%. I mean, there's so many jobs in the art department. So, certainly being facile with digital programs is really great. Photoshop, Illustrator, Rhino, ZBrush, any of those would be great. SketchUp even. But if you're not technical like that, having a great history in art history, understanding style, understanding the history of architecture, all of that is useful. I mean, there are, and being generous and asking questions, really, really important, because you just learn on the job. This whole job is learning on the job. Don't worry if you get out of school and you aren't, top of your class in, Excel or whatever. You'll learn it, and just be willing to jump in and do anything. And mine all your connections, work with lots of people, meet people, and find out who your people are, because we've all started in the same place. We all started out as PAs or interns, and sort of navigated our way through to people who really liked the kind of work we were doing, who we could talk to and communicate with, who supported us. One of the first people I met when I went to LA was David. Because I sent him a paper letter and said, and he met me for coffee, and now here we are sitting on a panel together. So it's just, that's how it happens. Just keep at it.
You're lucky to be in a film hub here, and it's going to become even more so with the studios. I believe that they're building studios here, and then you're nearby Atlanta, major film hub, and like what everybody's saying, just work on a movie. Just get your foot in the door and work on a movie, and be very aggressive about, getting a job to work on a movie, and then watch how how it happens. You may not even like working in the movie business. It might not be what you want to do, but that I think is the best experience. I'm not formally trained in comparison to Sandy, who is formally trained art history major. So I don't think you can get what I've done without. There are great schools now, and that's what you really need under your belt. But I just had, I was brought up by parents that encouraged me to be an artist and to be very aggressive, and I managed to do that. But I think that was my generation. I don't know. I think you need a combination of school, and there are great schools, AFI, which we just were at this past weekend. There's wonderful schools, but I'm not ruling out being self-taught. One of my favorite architects that did the pardon? Yeah. That is untrained architect, not formally trained. So.
Sandy, you want to wrap us up? Yeah, go for it.
Well, all those things are true. I think training, because you are in school, you've got to get this training in the different technical fields, and don't be afraid of it, because I'm not proficient in that because I'm coming from a different type of filmmaking.
Sandy's a good lead illustrator.
In listening recently to talks by, say, the Batman director or Lion King, you're seeing how we all are learning things as we go. The production designers are learning on every film they sign on to. And in fact, the directors are learning too. The producers are learning too. So don't be afraid of making that step and picking up something on the fly, as well as, you've got this great benefit of a school that can teach you things. But it is, where we started, collaboration, being there on time, and being a team player. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming.